Appeal, and it's we have a subtitle. It's How Do We Make Horror Appeal? So, which, well, maybe it's obvious for some, but for a lot of people, it's not. So we have, I guess Maurice Brones should also be joining us here in a minute. So I'll ramble for a few minutes just to explain some stuff, what we're doing. So my name is Seth Lindberg, so I'm a coordinator here, but I have a real passion for this topic. I actually, for Blackgate Magazine, interview authors on this topic, essentially looking for beauty in weird fiction, or beauty in horror, essentially. That's just, I don't know, it's my jam. I love that stuff. But I like to learn from other authors, and at least two of the panels here I already cornered before and done interviews for, and I was just highlighting to Steve that well, he might be next, but we'll see how this goes. So what we're going to do is we have 50-ish minutes here, so we'll start off with some questions to get things going. We do want this to be interactive, so if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll certainly have room for questions at the end. But I want to do more introductions, and it's best to have authors introduce themselves, so I think I know them. I could also screw that up. So what I'm going to do is pass the microphone, and with the panelists, give a short, 1 or 2 minute introduction of who they are and why they're on this panel. Yep.
Hi, my name is Byron Leavitt, and I am the writer for the company called Dimension Games. We make Deep Madness, Dawn of Madness, and Celestial, and other kind of sci-fi, horror, fantasy type stuff. I'm the author of the novel Deep Madness, Shattered Seas, as well as some of my own stuff. But my passion is to cultivate wonder, and I find that very often comes through through horror and through the dark places where the unknown is most expected. So, yeah, that's me.
Hello. So I am Jason Ray Carney. I am an English professor. I actually have a very boring title. I teach the history of literary criticism, but that's actually very exciting. So in the course of studying the history of literary criticism, I wrote my academic book on pulp fiction, Weird Tales specifically, and stories of Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, and H.P. Lovecraft. And obviously very much interested in the sublime and horror, the aesthetics of horror. Also really interested in Gothic fiction. So I think Gothic beauty is a completely separate category than normal beauty. So I'm interested to talk about this. So. Yeah, I'm also a fiction writer too. So I wrote an anthology of sword and sorcery fiction called Ray Fire and Other Stories. So,
yeah, we got this. And no one's ever accused me of not being loud. Okay, my name is Steve Diamond. I'm a horror and fantasy author for Bane, for Wordfire Press, and I've written for a number of different game companies. My latest novel, I co-wrote with a guy named Ray Carney. It's called Servants of War. It came out in March, and it's a very, very horror, dark fantasy novel. The Witcher meets 1917. So I'm a huge fan of this. I love talking about this topic. It was like the one panel I knew I wanted for this. So I love talking about this stuff. I talk about it often, usually with people who don't actually want to hear anything about it. But after I'm finished, either they agree that it was something worthwhile, or they remember that I write horror, and I'll just kill them afterwards. So, one of the two. Maurice?
So, my name is Maurice Brones. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author, and I have 2 books out right now. I have a science fiction, space opera, Sweep of Stars. Also, I have a middle grade detective novel called Untitled, which I wrote so that because my students were like, "Hey, Mr. Broaddus, can we read something that you've written?" And then they go through my catalog and go, "Oh, Orgy of Souls, what's that?" I have something for you to read, so let me write a whole new bookline for you, just for y'all. So I have 3 horror short stories out currently. One in Weird Tales magazine, one in Classic Monsters Unleashed, and one in Aliens vs. Predator. So.
Nice.
Awesome, thanks. So Yeah, we probably could talk all day about this. So, but maybe we'll go about in reverse then, starting from Maurice. But I'm curious about, especially whenever you crafted like or any type of weird art or horror, how did you approach, making this? I mean, typically there's an element of something that's scary, right, or something people don't want to see, but you're forced to present it, right? So there's that. What the hell tension is that? But that is. But I think you've all also done different audiences as well, or I think Moore's even written for young adults and board games. And so I'm curious, from each of your perspectives, you just maybe spend a couple minutes on how did you approach making it more accessible for one of your target audiences?
Oh man. So I usually, oh boy. Because I don't want to say, I'm like, F my audience. It's usually the
okay. All right, well, that works.
So I don't want to say that. So I'll start with, I write for me, and I write from a place of rage. Whenever I'm writing I realize I'm writing from a place of rage. There's something I've seen in the world, there's something I'm reacting to in the world, and so I'm writing from the place of rage. And I can't really do that with my audience in mind, because I'm going to feel what I want to feel, and I'm going to write what I'm going to write. So I don't really do that with an audience in mind, per se. So I start from that place. But then also, when editors come to me, they should know what they're getting, because I don't make any of this a secret. So when they come to me and say, hey, Maurice, we want you to write for Aliens versus Predator, I'm like, you do know this is going to be the blackest story you've ever seen, right? I like this story. And they're like, we want to see what that looks like. Because I spent the first half of my career as a horror writer with editors telling me to write for the market, as if I'm not a part of the market. Right? So now I'm in a spot where, no, I get to write, I'm writing for me now. And I'm writing the stories I want to see, but would love to regret coming up. So that's the place I operate from. So I can't be, I always think of market first. I'm always thinking about, this is what I would have wanted to be.
Yeah,
See?
Yeah. I just like to write what's fun, and sometimes that's monsters murdering the crap out of people, and sometimes it's a psychological horror thing or whatever. Interestingly, though, I like to write a lot of hope with my horror, because I find that the juxtaposition of the super tragic and horrific matched against the light and the hope, they complement each other so well in horror. And I like horror because I get to put characters in situations that could and should perhaps be otherwise hopeless. But I like to show them rage and struggle against that, and really work at it. Now that doesn't mean they're going to succeed, but I love that process, and I love putting characters in these crazy situations, and seeing how they can manage to get through it or not. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, so this question of why is horror appealing? It's one I totally don't have an answer for, but I think that's why it's so intriguing. Not knowing why we're attracted to this stuff. Thinking of maybe it's not even horror; it's something like the sublime. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept, but it's this philosopher Lindberg. He was really intrigued by how in the late 18th century people started painting pictures of volcanoes erupting and swallowing whole villages and stuff. It's what is wrong with these people? That's horrifying. A village, all these people being burned alive. Why is this? Where does this new type of painting, this sublime image come from? And his thing was that it makes us feel very small, and why do we want to feel small? I don't know. And when you watch horror film, why do we like to see people be killed by the psycho killer? Why do we like to see people just literally cut into pieces? There's something going on. I think it's a mystery. I'm hoping somebody on this panel has an answer. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm starting. Also, it is beautiful. There is a whole tradition of like Gothic beauty. Like Edgar Allan Poe said, in this essay he wrote called the Philosophy of Composition, said that like it's kind of a creepy thing that he says the most beautiful thing in the world is a young woman dying before her time. So. What's going on there with Poe's strange statement? But this we see it in like pale skin and Gothic clothing and people who are kind of like signaling that they're dead. But yes.
Add a comment real quick on that. So I got sucked into that philosophy of composition for a bit because I wanted to figure out what he was talking about. I think he had a point where his definition of beauty was any time the reader felt emotion. It wouldn't necessarily be something you're looking at beautiful. But if you could be emotive and evoke emotion, that in itself was, like, it seems, even if it was sadness. But I'll talk more about that here. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think Steve pretty well nailed it as far as my perspective too. Being able to show that hope and that beauty in the midst of the darkness is so incredible. And when you're able to bring out the light, it shines so much brighter in the darkness. So I personally, I've written stuff that could probably be considered horror for kids. I've written it for adults. I've written it for a lot of different folks. But it is. It's almost the place where a lot of these terrible things are happening, so it's almost like your defenses to a certain degree lower. I don't know if that makes sense, but you're more receptive to certain things. And so suddenly something that's beautiful just looks so much more beautiful when it's surrounded by this darkness and by this terror and by horrors. And I am actually I'm kind of Guillermo del Toro's mindset on monsters. I actually find monsters extremely sympathetic, and I like to make my monsters extremely sympathetic when I can, and show that they are not just the horrible abominations that are lumbering towards you or whatever to be scared of. There's something deeper there. There's something more tangible there. And the unknown is the uncharted territory. And when you're going into that unknown, it's you don't know what you're going to find. You could be absolutely terrified, and you probably will be absolutely terrified in the unknown, but you're also going to find the coolest stuff that you never imagined you'd ever seen before. So, I guess that's my answer.
Awesome. Well, the next round, I'm going to have people start off with Steve with this one, but I'm curious, as far as, I guess there's two ways to word this. Is there something that you find really horrific that there's still some beauty in it? And then you're welcome to flip that on its head, I guess, you would say. So maybe there's something you find beautiful that is actually there's a tinge of horror in it, and mainly with I wonder if you tap into that into any of your writing. So that's a lot, but I can repeat it, but you're first on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll go the humorous route instead of the very kind of dark and twisty route. Okay, so I don't like sharks. They suck. I recognize the beauty that they have in their predatory nature, in their size, the way they move through the water. But they scare the crap out of me. So I often share a story that talks about, and I relate it to horror, and the idea that horror is fear, dread, and shock, right? And I talk about going into a shark cage, where I thought I was going to face my fear, and I was going to be a smart boy. in Hawaii, and I went down into the shark cage, and it seemed like a great idea at the time. And got in there, and I feared the sharks. I was scared of them. And from the surface, you don't really understand how big they are. And then you get down into the cage, and you get your snorkel on, and you kind of shimmy down, and you're looking, and the first shark passes in front of you, and it just keeps passing in front of you because it feels like it's 900 feet long. And you just start this fear and this dread. You're like, okay, well, can sharks jump over the cage and get in here and just have a little Scooby snack for me? Like what the hell's going to happen? So I'm in this cage, and I get a little bit of a calm because I am completely terrified of these things, and they have really big teeth. But they're sliding by. They're just gliding by effortlessly in this water. They're beautiful, beautiful things. And I get really, really brave. Steve becomes a brave little tester. And he starts shimmying his way down the cage so I can get like this really nice 3D panorama. Get all the way to the bottom, I think. And I keep shimmying and I keep shimmying, and I'm like, dude, this cage is huge.
Oh no.
Why is this cage so huge? And I look down, it's because my feet missed. And my legs are just dangling there under the cage, and there's like 30 sharks underneath. And so I scream like, like your grade school girl, and I walk up water, run up water up to the very top. So yeah, like I use that concept in my fiction a lot. The idea that something can be graceful, something can be beautiful, and it'll totally eat your face. And the recognition of that in terms of how you can describe things, how the characters look at them, I think it's super awesome to explore, and it's a ton of fun.
I gotta ask you, have you written a shark story then?
I took a piece of that and I put it in my first YA horror novel. And I just ripped a small part of it from that and put it in the book. But mainly I use it when I teach about horror. I use that story. Yeah.
Maurice?
Right?
Yeah.
No! What? No. All right, so
Yeah.
here's what you need to know. Oh no, I'm just going off now.
Oh.
So I'm married interracially, and I have biracial children. We just took a trip to Hawaii. My son tried to be like, hey, Dad, let's have a father-son bonding moment. We can go into this cage full of sharks. And I'm like, son, I'm black. This is not what we do.
See, if you had been there with me, you would have talked me out of it.
Nope.
This would have been great.
I'll give you the second example. This is the example I give when I'm talking about horror stuff too.
So you didn't go in the shark cage?
No.
All right.
One of us is a smarter individual. It's not me.
So we were when I was coming up as a horror writer. Me and my friend Cheshire Burke, she's another horror writer. She's also black. And a friend of ours had given us a novel for us to have friends do. Hey, here's my novel. Can you read it? Tell me what you think. So in chapter 1, you have this guy. He has an uncle he didn't know who bequeathed him and his family this house. As one does, I guess. And they stay in this house, and a door materializes in the middle of the room, and it has all these ancient sigils around the door arch. And then at the end of chapter 1, the guy goes through the door. And me and Cheshire looked at each other going, this story began and ended in chapter 1. Because who goes through the door?
Never go through the door.
Right.
Never read the book.
You would think that, but then we started doing a survey.
Thank you.
Turns out all of our white friends went through the door. None of our black friends went through the door. And I even asked my wife, and at this time we've been married 13 years, and I'm like, honey, would you go through the door? And she's like, you at least have to see what's on the other side. Honey, we've been in this for 13 years. We should know better by now. can't remember what my point was. You know, I was just frantic. I just could not take the shark story.
I did not know that we had at least 50% of our panelists that were either in or near the Shark Tank. So I'm curious about the next two.
So how do you guys feel about sharks?
Yeah, I don't know. What your next one? We'll go yours. You don't have to talk about sharks, but if you do have a shark story, you're obligated.
I think sharks are cute, so. But I've also never been in a shark cage, so I cannot switch to that.
You're smarter than me.
So I think maybe one thing that comes to mind, back to the original question, would be spiders. Like I'm not really scared of spiders, really. But well, see, my wife is terrified of spiders. But when you look at the spiders too, there's a beauty and a symmetry to them, and the way they move and the things they do, and there's this almost otherworldly quality about them. So yes, they are in many ways, especially the big ones, scary as all get out. But there's also this strange beauty to them. And I feel like it's that way with a lot of different things. Maybe centipedes. Centipedes are creepy, but the way that they walk and the way that they move and the way that they just swerve and twist, and there's some really beautiful, interesting things happening there. The one thing that I'm truly scared of is actually not something that I think is beautiful at all, but I think it's something that a lot of people try to make beautiful. And that is the idea of oblivion, absolute oblivion. Because in that oblivion, so many people think of that oblivion as there's something, it's almost a romantic thing. But for me, that oblivion, there's nothing there. It is total emptiness. It is total darkness. It is total null. There is nothing there. It is void. And so, I guess the one thing that actually truly scares me is that, and no, I don't find it beautiful at all, but I also think it's interesting, so anyways.
Yeah, so I'm not a biologist, but I feel like there's this biological principle where we're sometimes suspicious of beauty because there are beautiful things that have become beautiful to kind of bring us in so they can kill us, right? Think about like the pitcher plant. Right, like it gets you to come in and it swallows you in this digestive juice, and you can see that in like the figure of the vampire, right? The vampire is this sexual being, it's fully dead, but it's promising reproduction, right? So it's like drawing you in. I'm thinking of, sorry to drop a whole bunch of films here, but like Midsommar is such a compelling film because it's like that town is beautiful, the rituals are beautiful, the food looks wonderful, but there's something in the back of your mind that says this is not right, this is bad. You get that in Robert Eggers' The Witch, right? Like, if you've seen that film, I'm sorry to spoil it, but I won't if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it. But
there's a witch.
Yeah, it's all covered of witches.
Don't tell them about the shark.
There's sharks. There's this final scene where there's these, you guys, okay, I'm going to say, I'm sorry to spoil. Anybody, raise your hand if you don't want me to spoil the film. But there's this final scene where this coven of witches, they just start rising into the dark night, and it's gorgeous, but it's terrifying. And the music is just like, you're looking at something that you should not be seeing. And like I said, it's a mystery. Like, I'm not sure why this, you see this character who you follow this whole time, she's basically sold her soul to the devil at this point, and she's rising into the darkness, and you're like, it seems really powerful, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're like weirdly like happy for her. She's finally got back out of this horrible world that has like treated her wrong, but at the same time, you're like, well, she's becoming this creature that is going to churn baby fat in a cave, right? Last comment. The figure of the vampire we can see how like on the one end they can be beautiful, like Tom Cruise, Lestat, right? Or on the other end they can be complete monsters, like covered in dirt, have like exactly. Yeah, so like, and I think that's this oscillating thing going on with like beauty as horror is beautiful and horror is revolting, and it can switch very quickly. I'm not sure why that's the case.
Awesome. So I got that one more key question at least, and that is, I think heard a couple of things here that we, as far as how horror is represented, we might be sympathetic for the monsters. There might be beauty in it, and there's a lot of aspiring writers out here that might want to know, like, okay, so how do you present the horrific element without maybe glorifying it? Maybe it might be violent or something. I'm curious if there's a fine line if you want to make this entertaining, but okay, how do you turn baby fat and not make it maybe too far? I mean, there's got to be a limit. Or like, wait a second, this isn't cool anymore. And I think you're right. I think it's right. You want to push it because you want something to be really exciting, but then you don't want to be, that guy. Like it's all of a sudden in the news or something. So I think we'll start with you, Byron. And we'll cycle it around.
Allegedly.
Allegedly?
We're not going to talk about Steve's criminal history right now.
I write horror because I can't do things legally.
Well, so actually, this is something that I deal with a lot. I've been writing a board game called Dawn of Madness, which is very, in many ways, dark horror. And there is, when you start showing a little bit of light, it makes that darkness so much more vivid, and it makes it so much more tangible, and to a certain degree. So there are aspects of horror that are absolutely revolting and terrible and awful, and like you're saying, the eating the babies and stuff like that. I mean, that the stuff like that, it's in there, and it's and there is no beauty in that part, and that's the deal. You can't have the beauty in the absolute darkness. You have the beauty in the other areas. You have the beauty in the tender little moments that come between the absolute darkness. You have the absolute darkness, you're going through that pit, but then you come out the other side, and when you get that character moment that's like the two sisters are coming together and they haven't seen each other, and they're both ripped to pieces, but they're there and they're clinging to each other, and that moment then becomes so touching and beautiful, and it just overwhelms you then, because the contrast is so severe between the absolute, utter, terrible horror and the beauty that you're seeing out before you. And I guess that's it's actually that contrast that in many ways for me is so beautiful. When you can show that absolute darkness, and then you can move into something that just breaks you. So.
Oh, is that Maurice?
So me?
Yeah. Around here. Yeah.
So a lot of my work has this sociological component behind it, as you can probably guess. I know, shocking. And so I'm thinking of two of my stories in particular. So there's one where I have a story about this vampire. He's gotten into this person's house. He's leaned over this child's bed, and so he's doing this meditation on whether or not he's a monster, as he's about to drain the life out of this child. But the story he's telling is against the backdrop of he has just witnessed a lynching. And so I do this detail of what happened at the lynching, what he witnessed, versus what he's about to do. And so it becomes this meditation on where is the true monster in the story. And I let you sit with the weight of all of it, the weight of history, the weight of all of that, just adding to the terror, to the suspense thing that I'm trying to do with that story. Now compare that with that Alien vs. Predator story, where, I'm telling the story of this all-black colony that's been financed. They've been established, and it turns out that they are there because the company is there to test a new vaccine using all these black folks. And so you have the weight of the history of the medical industrial complex working itself out on black bodies. That is literally the backdrop of that story. But I use a different tool. I use humor in this. And so now you have the two lead characters. I mean, they're doing this romp through the story, and I will say, one of the funniest things I've ever written. But I still take you on this journey, this nightmare journey of the way of this history, and then aliens and predators and shenanigans. So, but it's all about, what am I trying to do with the story? And then what are the tools at my disposal to most directly get that reaction out of you that I'm trying to get to?
Speaking of humor, Steve.
Oh, yes. I agree with everything that everyone's been saying. I too have used horror. I've used humor with horror. The interesting thing about it is you can use the humor to make it either to cut the tension, which you see a lot, right? That's generally what you see, almost the stereotype of it. It's a super crazy situation. I mean, if any of you know any folks in the military who've been in some of these super dire situations, those dudes have a pretty dark sense of humor because that's the way they cope, right? But the other thing you can do with it is, depending on where you place your humor, you can use it to make the horror so much worse. It just depends on where you place it. Like Maurice says, and I like when Maurice says this, it's a tool. You get to choose where you use it, where you implement it, and how you use it the best. And you can practice with that tool. In addition to that, when it comes to one of the things that Seth was asking was, how do you know if you pushed it too far? There isn't too far. That doesn't exist. What exists is how much are you going to limit your audience by how far you're pushing it. If you go way too far, your audience starts to shrink, right? The whole grimdark thing in fantasy, I love it. A lot of people love it. But it has, it's a specific audience in some cases. If you're talking about like a Mark Lawrence, it's this much of an audience. And then when you condense it to a character like Scott Baker, that audience starts to shrink in a little bit because it just gets darker and darker and darker. And in horror, like pure horror or adding horror elements into any of your stories, I always like to say horror's like bacon, it makes everything better. Regardless of what kind of story you're writing, horror ups the stakes for your characters and for the story. And so as long as you're pushing that in your story, and the characters are having real, like, honest to goodness reactions to the terror, to the beauty, to the dread that they're seeing, your story's going to be awesome. And so don't think of any of these things as limiting. Think of them as how you, as Maurice said, how you can implement them as a tool to just, give yourself self high fives every time you write something awesome.
Once again, this is such a, what is the boundary? How do you know if you push too far? Like, it's really hard to answer this question, but it's a compelling question because, you have a good question you can answer. But I was thinking about how, like, so much of horror orbits on taboo, right? So the moment you say, like, well, I really don't like sexual violence, that's not something I like, but all of Stephen King is gone now, right? Like, it's ubiquitous. It's in so many horror writers, like, they go there. I don't like when kids are hurt. It's all so, like, part of it goes back to its roots. Part of horror is there's this social convention that is transgressed, and that's what causes the horror. And I think what Steve just said about the your audience scenarios as you transgress certain taboos, I think that's appropriate. I mean, that's really true. Horror is like a masochistic genre. It's like, why do you subject yourself to this? Last thing I'll say is I'm going to reveal myself to be a binge watcher. Midnight Mass, for example, is a really good example. If you see Midnight Mass, I think it's amazing. But if you are my mom, a devout Catholic, that you think that the Eucharist is this, it's not for you, right? But I think it's still a very artful horror show. because it goes there, right? It actually goes for this. There's this sacred thing that people, kind of are very serious about, and it just I don't want to spoil it for you, but if you're
It's awesome.
You should see it. Particularly if you're Catholic, you should see it. No, maybe not.
Well, I'll just add to that just very briefly. As a Christian, I thoroughly enjoyed Mass. So there's that.
Awesome. So I got a couple other questions, but I do want to make sure we get questions from the crowd. We're kind of at that halfway point. So if there are any, we got at least 3. Okay. Everyone,
you know what?
I think I can go mobile. So I'm gonna pull the Phil Donahue thing.
Is there going to be brawls in the audience?
I saw the lady in the back first, so I'll try to get to everyone.
Special guest that nobody knows.
Does this still work? We good? The
Is this an audience point?
Okay.
Yeah, so Steve was touching on this a little bit, talking about horror as a tool. But I'm wondering if you have any opinions or anything more specific. Something I've seen thrown around sometimes is that, like, pocket horror, like a little bit of horror in the middle of something else, can be more effective than just like a full horror piece. Like, anyone who's played Mario 64, the Boo House, and that big piano, a lot more effective at like sticking with you and freaking you out than like playing through some of the Resident Evil games or something, or like Studio Ghibli's the scene where No Face is going on his rampage is somewhat more effective than a lot of stuff in Princess Mononoke, just because Princess Mononoke is more like serious throughout. So I'm just wondering, do you guys find it more effective or easier to do just a little bit of horror in the middle of something else?
Oh, I got an answer for this. So my first novel that came out 2010, called Kingmaker. Right? Urban fantasy novel, right? No. It was a coming-of-age horror novel. That's what I was writing. But because they saw Excalibur, I pitched it as Excalibur meets The Wire. I pitched it as that, and so they were just like, oh, it's an urban fantasy. And I'm like, is it? Which only set up, in some ways, they kind of set up literally, it's my first book out, but they kind of set up my audience, or set me up for failure, because if it's marketed as urban fantasy, there is what I call the page 100 test. Because there is a scene on page 100. Let's just say it involves razor blades and chewing. But King Arthur! That scene, though, I will say this, because of that page 100 test, that's when I know whether or not you're going to go with me for the ride. If you go to page 101, oh, I got you. If you close the book and go, this is not for me, it's the page 100 test. But that scene sears itself because everybody's expecting, and it's about expectations, right? They're expecting an urban fantasy. When I hit them with that horror scene, yeah, and it helps define me. It helps define me, helps define the book. Like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing in the story.
I think the interesting thing about horror is that it's a very loaded word. You say horror, and the first thing that, and I do this on purpose to people. They're like, "Oh, what do you write, Steve? You seem like such a nice guy." I'm like, horror. and almost instantly, the first thing they say is, like Saw? I'm like, no, actually, like Alfred Hitchcock. I'm like suspense and all of this is such a big aspect of it. So let me describe a book for you. There's a book where in order to prevent effectively what we'll call a demon apocalypse, this group of individuals goes on a quest to basically to get a seed of a sacred tree to plant it, because this tree will help prevent the demon apocalypse, hell breaking loose literally on earth. Yeah, that's the Elfstones of Shadow books. The whole time, the party is being stalked by the Reaper. Okay? But no one says, well, Maurice, that's a horror novel. No, no one says that. They're like, oh yeah, this is the second epic fantasy novel that Terry Brooks wrote. I love Terry. Terry's a great guy. And that's my favorite book of his. Again, I think to your point, it depends on, well, what story do you want to tell? Do you want to go like a full horror route? As Maurice said, what expectations and kind of promises, so to speak, tacit promises are you making to your audience? If I say that I'm writing a horror novel, then people expect certain things. If I say, oh, I'm writing a romance novel, and 100 pages in, all of a sudden, like body parts are flying everywhere, not in a sexy way. Like crazy stuff is just getting real. Like people have expectations. One of my buddies, Dan Wells, he wrote a story called "I'm Not a Serial Killer," and oddly enough, it's about a kid who thinks he's a serial killer. Surprise! About halfway through the book, it becomes obvious that there's a supernatural element involved, and for a lot of people, that turned them off. They thought they were reading Dexter or something. And it shifted, and there's a supernatural element. It's all about managing the expectations. And you can do that with really, in other genres, you can do that with small moments of horror to again, like I said earlier, up the stakes a little bit. It's very effective. Or you just write the whole thing as horror, and as long as you practice at it and keep writing at it, that will be really effective.
Are there other questions? Okay,
so this one kind of goes more to Maurice, but everybody else is open to answer. I feel like a lot of what you talked about is hit on kind of the concept of buy-in, getting a person to accept that this feels realistic and good, that suspense of disbelief. And so kind of my curiosity to you, where you're talking about the different groups of people not wanting to go through the door, what would it have taken for you to have accepted this was the right decision to go through the door? I would have done that.
Steve pushing him from behind?
Right.
Let's go, buddy. I got you.
That's such a good question. What would it take me to go through the door? Yeah, it kind of comes back to emotional stakes.
Yeah.
So family, I like that. Family being on the other side. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm also a crass materialist. So I mean, pay me enough. Probably gonna go through the door. But it's gonna take something like that to really get me to because demon door. I'm good.
I think Jason went through this already, actually. Really? Did you go through the door?
I've went through many doors. No, I was thinking how we haven't talked about this, but a big part of horror is I'm using this in a psychological way, perverse desire, right? Like desires that aren't human. I'm thinking of the Cenobites, and I'm talking about all these films now, but the Cenobites from Hellraiser, they love what's happening to them, and that's terrifying. Or you have these characters who are undergoing transformations, and the Fly, he's starting to wanting to do certain things, and I feel like in horror, when you have that door, that dark room where there's clearly a monster in there, and the protagonist is they for some reason they have to go in there. They're enthralled by it. It's just intriguing. It's just, how do you, as a writer, render that perverse desire? How do you make it convincing that this person would want to do that? Maybe if you there's all sorts of ways of doing it, and maybe you give a hint in an early story that they like this and that, and then later they consummate this desire in this weird way.
I think, it's a good point to make horror convincing. If you're presenting something to your readers and you don't have that emotional stake or something, then it's going to feel really contrived. So you might have to ask yourself, if you're in that position, why the hell would you go through that door and make sure that you got that word. So there you go.
Hi, I just wanted to ask about your advice on the pacing of horror, because obviously you don't want to just jump in and throw it at them, but you don't want to tiptoe around the bush, So I just wanted to know like what each of your opinion is on like where to start horror and how to keep it going and keep it interesting.
He's going to go first.
Yeah, right.
So, for me in horror, there's this ebb and flow, right? So, I find that it's almost always best to start down here and work your way up here. So, you're always going to want to start for me, in a lot of ways. And actually, now that I'm saying this, I actually broke this rule significantly in one of my last books. Where I started way up here and then dropped down. So it just depends on the story. It really just depends on the story. But there is that ebb and flow. You need those quiet times, and you need those points where people can just relax and people can take a breather. Because if you don't have those points where people can take a breather, they're just going to burn out.
It's like a Michael Bay film.
Right, exactly.
Like how many explosions can you see?
If you have 2 hours of just constant all over, it's not effective. The monster, that's why the most effective monster movies are always the one where the monster is hidden. You see the monster very little in the course of the story for the most part. So like you take Alien, right? The alien doesn't even show up until like 40 minutes into the movie. You take, and when it does, you only see it in little glimpses by and large up until almost the very end. And it's similar in A Quiet Place where you don't really see the things coming at you. So you try to keep it hidden because it's scarier when it's hidden. But you also try to keep those peaceful moments so that when you just go hard, people are first of all caught off guard, they're way more scared by it, and they're also a little more ready for it, and they're not going to burn out as quick. So hopefully that addressed the question. I'm not sure it actually did, but hopefully.
I think, it's like any novel. Like pacing's pacing. Whether you're writing horror or fantasy or a military thriller or romance or whatever, like pacing's pacing. I always say, like, in order to get good at it, you've got to practice it a lot. It doesn't just magically show up in a package on your door from Amazon Prime and it's like, hey bro, now you know pacing. That'd be super awesome. I think we'd all appreciate that. But kind of like what Byron was saying is, with horror especially, you can't just stay up here the whole time. You've got to have like a lot of this, right? Have you ever had a really, 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 really good steak?
Sorry.
Like,
we were talking about vampires earlier?
No. I'm not judging. Yeah. So like a super good barbecued steak. Okay. Have you ever had a super terrible one?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you know how bad that one is?
It's not
because it tastes terrible. And you've had the awesome one. And once you've had the awesome one, you're like, man, screw this one. So horror and pacing is that way. Everything, as soon as you've experienced, you experience the high within it, you need to take it back down to the low a little bit so that people understand exactly how crazy that was. To counterpoint the stakes so that they understand how real messed up things are going to get once you reintroduce, say, the monster again. Aliens, we know how crazy Aliens is going to get because we saw Alien. And so in Aliens, there's the scene where Ripley and Newt get trapped by the corporate dude in the little room, and with one of the face huggers. And that's actually probably the scariest scene in the movie, in what otherwise is more of an action movie. And that's because you know how bad that is, and more importantly, Ripley knows how bad those are. And so that scene, and where it's placed, it's actually a very quiet scene for the most part. And it's really interesting in terms of pacing and how it's integrated with the rest of the plot. And, guns blazing colonial marines.
I want to interrupt real quick. I wasn't sure Jason has a comment, but we can hear the you guys can hear me. Hello. So we have we have the last 9 minutes or so. We like to leave the room about 5 minutes before, so we're on the 5-minute cuts. But Jason, you had a comment, but I want to make sure you guys have maybe if you had a last-minute word that you want to get in. It's a good time to do that. But I'll let Jason start.
My last comment.
Oh, you can mix it. You can conclude.
I have my concluding remarks now.
Yeah.
No, to your question about the pacing, he's kind of an asshole, so I don't like bringing him up. But H.P. Lovecraft, right? In Lovecraft's fiction, it's almost all realism until the end, right? And it's just like he spends all these tiny brushstrokes establishing the principle of reality, and then once you're like immersed in the story, then the horror comes, right? And I like the analogy of the sand mandala, right? A sand mandala is this sand painting that monks paint on the ground, and then they spend all this time on this fine detail, but then what do they do once they finish the sand mandala? They destroy it. And I think that's what good horror writers do, is they spend a lot of time to slow burn, they kind of get you into this state where you're convinced, and then crazy stuff starts to happen. But yeah, and I guess that's also my concluding remarks.
Awesome. Great.
It was a lot of fun.
So, real quick, so for me, my closing remark would be, it's going to be about voice. All stories, where are you in that story? Where is your voice? What makes it a you story? And so I'll pick up with the H.P. Lovecraft thing. My story in Weird Tales starts with an H.P. Lovecraft story. It's basically a reinterpretation of his story, Dreams of the Witch House. My story is called Dreams of the Cipher House. And I thought, as I sat down to write that, what would H.P. Lovecraft love for me to do with this story? I know. He would want me to tell this story through the eyes of hip-hop artists.
I can see him saying that, yeah.
Right. And that's my entry point into Lovecraft, because Lovecraft, I'm going to bounce off of Lovecraft every day of the week. Yeah. But now I'm going, what does Maurice Broaddus bring to a Lovecraft story? What does a Lovecraft story look like through the eyes of Maurice Broaddus? What does the story look like through your eyes, or your eyes, or your eyes? And ultimately, that's what the reader wants.
Are you limited, Steve?
These are all tools for you. They're like tools in the tool belt. Sometimes you're going to use them like a hammer. You're going to use a hammer a lot. But sometimes you're going to need like a really fine chisel. Sometimes you're going to need an X-Acto knife. Like, just practice. Just write more and more and more. Practice using these things. I host a writing podcast with my buddy Larry Correa called the Writer Dojo. And what we do is we talk about all this stuff and we say, look, just because you don't know how to use that tool right now doesn't mean that it's a bad tool. It just means that you need to practice with it. It just means that you need to find the right situation in which it works for you. Because like Maurice said, your voice is you. And maybe you know how to use that tool in a way that I just can't, or I don't know how. And that's the cool thing, is the unique voice, like Maurice said, that you can bring. Man, that's where the money is. That's where you get to tell the really interesting, unique stories that no one else but you can tell.
I'll give you about 30 seconds to work something out.
All right. So I'm going to end this with H.P. Lovecraft too, because why not? So I found this quote not too long ago, and it sums up a lot for me. And I also think it kind of sums up a lot of what he believed too, and I also kind of thought he did. Pleasure to me is wonder, the unexplored, the unexpected, the thing that is hidden, and the changeless thing that lurks behind superficial mutability. So when I don't consider myself a horror author. I consider that I write wonder fiction. And there was David Farland coined that term, and it's when you're in that place, it doesn't have to all just be horror. It can be the beautiful. It can be the transcendent. It can be just fantastic and wondrous and awesome. But it can also go to those really dark places. And when you have that black and that white together, there is nothing else like it. So, yeah, that's
Thank you. I wish we could have gotten all the questions, but we don't. If we can, maybe catch these guys in the hall. But let's thank the panelists real quick. And we'll have a couple minutes to race off to the next one. Thank you.